ship, not the dinghy.
Okay, got you.
Less impressive, it was the dinghy.
Thank you, Timmy. Beautiful day in Sydney. Well, there's plenty to talk about this morning with Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, who joins us now from Melbourne. Josh, good morning to you. Nice to be with you this morning. Firstly, sad news overnight about the death of John Elliott. He was the former boss of your beloved Carlton, not to mention a one-time Federal Liberal Party president. How will you remember him?
Well, he was a larrikin. He was a larger-than-life figure who will leave a very lasting legacy and be sorely missed. He had a huge impact, Karl, on the sporting world, on the corporate world, and on the political world. He was president, as you say, of the Carlton Footy Club. We shared that passion. And he was president of the Liberal Party, and you know you never were in doubt as to where he stood. Your cameraman here, Leon, was just telling me that his dad was John Elliott's driver for 10 years.
Well,
and when John Elliott asked him, John Elliott asked him which footy team he barracked for, he said Fitzroy, and he said no longer. If your dad's working for me, you're barracking for Carlton's son, and now he still barracks for Carlton. So, you know, there are all these amazing stories. There are all these amazing stories around the place of the impact he had.
Yeah, really love beautiful words there, Treasurer. Thank you. And look, I tell you what, it's been a pretty rough week for your home city of Melbourne, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been very sad to see those images of the large demonstrations, the violent demonstrations, the desecration of the shrine. It should never have happened, and obviously we've called it out for what it is. It's important that people get vaccinated, but it's also important that the economy opens up. My concern, my focus is to hopefully see that construction sector come back, because more than 300,000 people rely on their livelihoods, rely on the construction sector opening up.
Okay, Queensland could keep its borders shut for Christmas. Anastasia Palaszczuk has hit back at federal criticism of her tough stance. She's clearly fed up with all that criticism. Have you spoken to her at all, or does she need to be brought into line with powers that you don't have?
Well, I have a good constructive relationship with my counterpart in Queensland, but if Anastasia Palaszczuk were to keep these borders closed at 80% vaccination rates, that would be a very bad decision. It would cost Queensland jobs. It would divide Queensland families. It would be inconsistent with the national roadmap, and it would be delaying the inevitable, because we need to learn to live with the virus. If you look in the United Kingdom, if you look in the United States, there are thousands of cases each and every day of COVID, but people are getting on with their lives in a COVID-safe way. That's what we need to do here in Australia, and people need to be rewarded for getting the jab, as they're doing in record numbers.
Do you know what, though? I mean, her point is that they've got tremendous freedoms, more freedoms in Queensland now than anyone who opens up at 80% in the other states. From her perspective and from a Queenslander's perspective, it makes sense. So why would they change and alternate it? And you can't do anything about it, so you've got to live with it.
Well, Karl, you know as well as I do that Delta has changed the game. Here in Victoria, Daniel Andrews thought he could defeat the virus, and then he had to accept that the elimination strategy doesn't work. And tomorrow or the next week or the next month, you could see an outbreak in Queensland, or indeed in Western Australia and in other states. So it's really important that we get rid of this mentality that we can eliminate the virus. We can't. We have to learn to live with it, and that means getting people vaccinated. That means putting in place the relevant restrictions, but that also means opening up our borders, because for too long families have been divided here.
Treasurer, you are throwing your weight behind zero emissions by 2050. Have you run this past your acting Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce?
We had a good conversation last night. We've been speaking every day, and this speech is very much about pointing out the reality in financial markets. You see, whether it was the Industrial Revolution, whether it was the digital age, financial markets have reacted to these structural shifts, and climate change is no different. And it impacts upon Australia because we're so heavily reliant on foreign investment. We have about $4 trillion of foreign investment in our country. About half of our government bonds are bought by foreign investors, and about 20% of bank lending is supported by offshore borrowing. So whether whether it's a household mortgage or whether it's a business loan that you get from your local bank, you're actually getting that in part from foreign borrowings. And it's so important that we continue to be an attractive place for investment here in Australia and that we don't get penalised. That's why I'm making it very clear that we have the right regulatory frameworks here in Australia, but also that we stick to our emissions reduction plans and targets, because that's a very important thing to do.
When I read that this morning, Josh, I almost heard Matt Canavan choking on his breakfast steak.
Well, you can't please everyone all the time, and that's why you go into politics, to do the things that matter and to do the things that are important to you and your community. And of course, you know, we haven't taken any final decisions on this. We are progressing the issue internally. But Karl, we also have a very positive story to tell. Our emissions are down by more than 20% since 2005. That's double the OECD average. That's faster than New Zealand, Canada, Japan and the United States. And some of our, oldest businesses like BHP or Rio Tinto, they're actually at the cutting edge of new innovation and technology. And so people need to understand the great opportunities for Australia out of this clean energy revolution.
Have a great weekend. Just quickly, your tip.
The D's, they've had to go back to 1964, Karl, to see their last premiership. Back then, the Beatles were travelling around Australia. A cigarette, was smoked on by the players at half time, and you could get a beer for 20 cents. Those were the days, mate. Back then,
whack a dart in your mouth at half time. Thank you, mate. We've got to move. We've got to move.
Well, that's what they were doing.
I know.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Right, well, up next.